Welcome back, everyone, to episode 4 of the Unclassified Podcast. We have a lot to discuss today. Preston wrote on Airforce 1, Bashar al-Assad has fallen, and the people of Syria are free at last. Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And much, much more. So, Preston, how are you doing? How are you doing with, are you still in shock and awe from being on Air Force One?
Yeah. So I want to talk about that. I think there's some interesting behind the scenes, but Army football won for conference champions, so I'm kind of riding that high horse right now. But yeah, man, Syria is going to be interesting because it's I'm cautiously optimistic for a lot of folks there that this will be better for them, but it's messy to say the least. So I think that'll be something good to dive into today. But it only took us 3 weeks to have to jump into a midweek episode, but I'm here for it. Let's do it, man.
Absolutely. And so, prediction for this Saturday. Does Army beat Navy?
Yeah, Army beats Navy. I think they're a 6.5 point favorite right now, 5.5 points, something like that, which makes sense. The game always tends to be pretty close. My guess is that's just about spot on. I'll bet Army ends up winning by between 6 and 10 in a low-scoring game, probably certainly under 40 points, maybe even under 30. So should be a good one. Always is.
All right. Well, which one are we jumping into? Are we jumping into the Middle East, or are we jumping into kind of like the Middle East, Air Force One?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think we need to add chapters in this one for sure, because it's going to be two kind of very different subjects in a way. But I think we start with Syria.
All right.
Because the second part is going to be very personal opinion based, very different from what we normally do. But yeah, so Syria, the Assad regime has fallen. We're recording this at 9 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, December 10th.
Yes, sir.
As we were in the process of getting on here, I was already seeing new updates come out. So just whenever you listen to this, know that it's a pretty dynamic situation. I don't know, Ben, where do you want to start with this, man? There's been so much.
I don't think we need to rehash the whole Civil War, but I guess we can go with the fall of Damascus, with the Syrian Free Army coming out of basically nowhere to take Damascus. That was pretty shocking, right?
Yeah, and this is going to be, so when I say complicated, there's so many different acronyms and names. The Free Syrian Army largely doesn't exist anymore. So what we saw come down from Aleppo in the north, and if you look at Syria on a map, it's really broken out for this context. Think of 3 different sections. 4, we'll go 4. We've got the west coast, we've got kind of the central and south portion, and then the northeast. So what happened was through this central south portion, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a designated terrorist organization by the United States, took Aleppo, and then we kind of blinked, and they took Hama, then Homs, and then Damascus. And largely the fighting died down the further they went south. So a lot of people were thinking, the big fight is coming, and just wait until they get to the next portion of the battlefield. And what we saw was Assad's forces lay down their arms and flee and choose not to fight. Now, this is HTS, so this is, again, a designated terrorist organization with some previous governance experience in Idlib province, so we can kind of look to what they did in the past as an idea of what they might do in the future. But, when I say the future is very much unknown, I think is the way to put it at this point.
Wow, so where do you see, so let me ask you this. I've been a little confused about this. The Free Syrian Army, or the rebels, the rebel group that got there are very few of them. Why do they give up control to HTS? They conquered Damascus, yet you have Jolani, I believe his name is, the leader of HTS, is now calling the shots. Why give it up? Is just because they're outnumbered? Or
HTS was the group that led the charge. So this was an HTS-led operation starting in Idlib through Aleppo all the way down to Damascus. So there's been a lot of smaller groups within that have kind of hitched their wagons to HTS, but this is, by and large, HTS's deal. Up north, you have the Syrian National Army, which is a Turkish-backed group that has fought against everybody at varying times. And then in the northeast, you have the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, that generally fight against ISIS, also sometimes the Syrian National Army, and sometimes HTS. So it's messy. But what we've seen in the group in charge in all of central and southern Syria right now is HTS.
What does the future hold for the Kurds? and for the SFD, or for the Syrian Democratic Forces. Yeah, SDF.
Yeah,
so many acronyms, yeah.
This is where I was saying, I'm going to spend a minute breaking down these kind of quadrants, which are very informal and just for my sake. But on the West Coast, and this is something we should come back to, you have technically kind of the last holdouts of the Assad regime, if you will. We've got a Russian air base and a Russian naval base at Tartus. They're still held by the Russians. On Live UA map, which has been a pretty good resource to look at, they're still marked as like Assad territory, but the regime has fallen. Those two little pockets and maybe some other pockets of Russian outposts, but either way, that's the westernmost side of Syria, completely surrounded by opposition forces at this point. Through the middle, from Aleppo up north all the way down to Damascus in the south, and much of southeastern Syria is now controlled by HTS, as in HTS is the governing authority there. This is, like we've learned throughout the war in Ukraine, just because a country moves through a territory doesn't mean they fully control it. They are the governing entity, though. Then when you shift over east, especially in the northeast of the Euphrates River, that's where you have the SDF territory, Syrian Democratic Forces. This is a group aligned to the United States. Complicated history there with Syria, with Turkey, and with the SNA. There have been elements of the PKK, which is a designated terrorist organization, that have at times been a part of the SDF. And then you have the SNA and the SDF are actually fighting each other in the northern portion of the country at times. So the Kurds are a big question. That's largely SNA, SDF up north, or really the SDF up north, excuse me. And Turkey doesn't want the Kurds to gain any power, neither really does Iraq or Iran or Syria or anyone, for that matter, outside of the Kurds. There's been some pushes recently to try to get people to stop fighting against the Kurds because they're kind of seeing it as an opening. The chaos in Syria has provided an opening for groups like the SNA to go after the SDF. But that's a big question now, always has been. I did see some footage today that the SDF captured some Syrian air defense assets and are moving those into their territory. So maybe they're prepping for the long haul.
Do you see a future where a independent Kurdistan is declared?
Honestly, not something I've spent a lot of time studying, so hard to say. I don't know that this drastically changes anything. Again, all of the groups that don't want an independent Kurdistan are still in power. With the exception of Assad, now they're replaced with HTS, and Kurdistan is not one of their top 50 priorities.
That's true. Assad, speaking of Assad, where is he? Where's Assad?
That's the question. My money, and this might sound stupid, but my money is that he's not in Syria anymore. Technically, he hasn't been seen in a few days. I don't know the last time he was seen publicly. I can't remember if there were actually pictures of him in Russia, because he did make a trip to Russia.
Putin granted him asylum. Yeah.
Right, but I don't remember if there were any pictures of Assad from that trip. Did you see any?
I didn't even... now I understand what you're saying. So you think perhaps he was granted asylum, but that he's not there yet?
There hasn't been any confirmation that he's there. But there also hasn't been confirmation that he's not. So there was some pictures and videos circulating of a possible plane crash in western Syria that people said it might have been Assad on that plane. But that was 2 days ago. We now haven't seen any pictures of a downed aircraft. So I don't know if that was made up or spoofed or whatever. Again, my gut, look, aircraft are still able to come and go from Syria, generally speaking, although the airports are shut down, but Assad could easily get on a plane and leave. So my gut says that he's probably not in country anymore. But nobody's seen him, right? Which is crazy when you think about it. The regime fell so fast, the dude's just off the grid. Like, no speeches, no last-minute things to say. He's just gone.
That is kind of crazy. Was it believed at the time that Gaddafi or Saddam had left the country, or was it known that they were hidden?
I can't remember Gaddafi. I know with Saddam, the belief was he was in the country. I don't remember anything thinking that he might have fled. I'm sure there would have been some conversation about maybe he moved into Syria, but they got him pretty quick, right? Now we say pretty quick. At the time, it felt like it was never going to happen, but they got him in December, I believe, of 2003, and the invasion kicked off in March. So,
oh wow, that is a long time.
Is it a long time or a short time? I can't. You know what I mean? When you're hunting down the leader of a country.
Historically, long time. But the U.S. had conquered Iraq in like what, 3 weeks? They'd taken Baghdad pretty quickly.
Fell in a couple weeks, yeah. So Assad, I mean, what we saw with some of the leadership here, and I'm sure we'll see more soon, some top generals killed themselves. We saw some of Assad's family members. I think it was his cousin, who the dude wasn't just his cousin, right? Like, he was in the military and has recorded himself executing prisoners and torturing people. So, like, it's not like he just happened to be an Assad relative. He was a pretty awful dude. He got caught and was hung publicly. I think we'll probably see more of that. But as of now, we're actually seeing HTS meeting with former Assad government officials to put together a transition plan. Like, it's, in some ways, it's kind of crazy organized.
Do you see HTS going the way of the Taliban, or do you think Jolani has learned? I've seen people joke that he read the book Why Nations Fall. Do you think or Why Nations Fail, I believe it's called. Do you think he goes the way of the Taliban, where he comes up with, or maybe he's lying about these grand liberal dreams, only to bring down the hammer in a few months? Or do you think he's genuine about wanting a reformed Syria?
So this is really interesting. And what I've noticed in the last few days is that you have a lot of longtime Syria watchers, of which I am not. I've been adjacent to the space. But there are some people that have been hyper-focused on this for a long time. And then actual Syrians are optimistic and hopeful that this will go the right way. And then you have a lot of people like sitting at home in the United States or across Europe saying this is going to be so much worse. So it's an interesting mix. I tend to put some confidence in the Syrian people at this point, knowing what they're getting into. But the big question is, what is Jolani going to do going forward? We have to approach this recognizing that it's not going to be a democratic, open election governed in the style of like Western, freedom. Like that's not in the cards, and we shouldn't hold them to that standard because it's not realistic. It's not going to happen. I would expect it to be much more moderate than what we saw under Islamic State and even under the Taliban, because HTS at this point has had a track record of governing Idlib. And it's not all of Syria, but they did have full control over that area. They didn't, from what we can tell and from the public information, they didn't persecute ethnic or religious minorities, which is a big step up, especially from Islamic State, but also from the Taliban. Women were not forbidden from going in public. They didn't have to be fully covered. I believe women were allowed to participate in the workforce and go to school. It was a far cry from the strict interpretation of Sharia law that Islamic State put in places like Raqqa and Mosul, and it's even a far cry from what we're seeing in Afghanistan. Again, though, we've got these two extremes, right? You've got life under Islamic State and then life in the United States or Western Europe. It's not going to be either one of those. It's just a matter of how far it shifts in one direction or the other. The benefit right now, I think, to Jolani is his severance of ties to al-Qaeda back in 2017 was because he wanted to focus. He's Syrian. So I think he was born in, I want to say Saudi, but grew up in Syria. And he moved to Syria then in 2011, 2012 because he saw an opportunity, right, to try to. The optimistic side is he saw an opportunity to create a better Syria. The pessimistic side is he saw an opportunity to gain some power back home. We have seen him become more nationally focused. So whereas al-Qaeda and Islamic State have always had this grand global idea, you haven't seen that from HTS, and that's one of the arguments as to why he made the public break with al-Qaeda, was saying, you guys are too focused on global jihad. I am focused on Syria, on Idlib. If that's the case, it's possible that while he is running a Salafi jihadi organization that does not like the United States and doesn't particularly like Westerners, they might not provide a staging ground for foreign terrorist organizations, and they might be exclusively focused on trying to build up the country of Syria. It's the optimistic take right now.
I've seen people say that Jolani killed U.S. soldiers in Iraq. Do you think that will have any impact on sanctions on HTS going forward?
This is an interesting one that I want to throw back to you, too. So, not a good guy. Like, I'm not going to try to present that Jolani is a good guy with a good track record. He's got a lot of sketchy dealings in his past with Islamic State, with al-Qaeda, and he has blood on his hands from American service members and a lot of people. across the Middle East over the years. So that's where this is one of those that requires nuance, I think. He might end up being a good option for the Syrian people, a better option. He might end up not letting terrorist organizations flourish like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, but he also isn't a good dude. Don't expect him to be speaking to a joint session of Congress anytime soon. There are questions right now as to whether or not the terrorist designation will fall off these guys, and I think it's actually a good conversation to have. And it's something that I think we've struggled with in Afghanistan, is what value does it bring versus what influence could we have in the area by opening up some degree of aid. And I feel the same way about Afghanistan, for what it's worth. They have not met the requirements that they said they were going to. They're housing Al-Qaeda. They are fighting Islamic State, so we got that going for us. But it's been a brutal regime in Afghanistan. But the sanctions, I don't know, are we really getting anything out of that when the country is already so isolated and cut off? I don't know. What do you think? How would you feel if the terrorist designation was lifted from groups like the Taliban and possibly HTS, who all of a sudden are actually in charge of a country?
So I think I think the past of the groups is important. But also, I think back to other wars we fought, like Germany, Japan, where we had a lot of people who we were fighting who suddenly, had to be forgiven and forgotten, right? So I think it's not necessarily a bad idea to forgive and... What's the Kennedy quote? Forgive your enemies, but don't know their name. I think if we want a larger say in the region, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I mean, there are people who know much more about their terror ties than I. But if it looks like they could turn the right page, I don't see why not at least try to work with them. And when it comes to the Taliban, the fact that they're back to housing Al-Qaeda, whatever, keep them sanctioned. But I don't know, HTS, I think the U.S. could show goodwill. And if our goodwill is rewarded with them giving us a middle finger, then we can put the sanctions back. So, Thoughts on that take?
I'm torn on all of it. Again, Jelani, not a good guy. HTS, not a good organization. Hate the Taliban. Don't like that organization or the people leading it. But when they're in charge of people, a lot of people who didn't vote for them, right? A lot of people in Afghanistan did not want the Taliban to be in charge, for instance, and now they find themselves in that situation. I don't know how much good our sanctions are doing versus harm to those people. If we're, I think there was a good stat or study about U.S. sanctions on Iraq following the Gulf War, and just how devastating that was to the average Iraqi citizen. And it really didn't do much to impact Saddam and the ruling elite, but it starved out a lot of people and prevented medical aid from getting to the poorest of the poor in Iraq. That's something I think about. Is there a better way to do it? And I don't know. This is not a call to release all sanctions or remove the terrorist designation. I don't know that we should approach it. I think we have to be very thoughtful of how we do some of these things.
Makes sense. Let me ask you this about the Taliban. So leading up to 9/11, after 9/11, they played dumb. The whole, we don't know Al-Qaeda's here. And then being we put Bin Laden on house arrest, it's all being handled. When you were there, did you find, I assume you didn't interact with them one-to-one, but did you find this playing dumb kind of way to be a way of life in Afghanistan? Or is that exclusively designated to the Taliban, acting like they're hoodwinking? Should I say hoodwinking Westerners with the whole, we have them on house arrest, Al-Qaeda's being handled, we won't let them operate here anymore. But in reality, they're not doing anything.
Yeah, I don't know that I would. I mean, we talked to a lot of people in Afghanistan. I don't think I ever interacted with any Al-Qaeda guys when I was there. Probably did interact one-on-one with some Taliban without knowing it. Usually that was just more of a direct fire exchange type situation, but they had no qualms about lying to us, I would say. We would, for instance, get shot at from a village and move in there over the next couple hours and come across a clearly civilian, right? A woman or an elderly man or a child, and say, who let the Taliban in here? And they'd be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's like, bro, there were bombs falling on this structure 20 minutes ago. What are you talking about? You don't know. And I think it was just a survival thing. They had to live in that scenario. We didn't. So what incentive is it for them to be honest with us, if you will? But I don't know. I'd be hard-pressed to apply that across the entire country.
Yeah. So HTS, though. Do you think, I mean, in reality, what terror groups can they harbor outside of Al-Qaeda?
Technically Islamic State. Now, that's what we're looking at.
Are they buddies, though? I don't think so.
No, they're not. And that's going to be one of the questions in the coming days. The U.S. just kicked off a massive wave of airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria right as Assad fell. And they didn't keep it to northeastern Syria. They hit targets in the central portion of the country that technically were under Assad's control, but, are not anymore. That's a big question. There's a lot of Islamic State fighters being held in prisons in Syria right now, technically by the Assad regime. I don't know what's happening to those, if those guys are still guarding the prisons or what that's going to look like. So Islamic State has not gone away. They're a small cancer still in Syria, so that would be a concern. Does HTS have the will to go after them, or are they going to be more focused on governing and trying to maintain stability in the western portion of the country? My guess is the U.S. is going to ramp up counter-ISIS operations, probably Turkey as well, to a degree. And, yeah, that is one. And then Al-Qaeda, I wouldn't write Al-Qaeda off entirely.
Do you believe the rumors and the allegations that at Russian military bases, Russian military encampments, as well as Assad encampments, that ISIS uniforms are found, suggesting that Russian special forces and the Syrian army were acting as ISIS to stage attacks?
I hadn't seen that, but I wouldn't jump to that right away. For one, soldiers like trophies.
Right, that is true.
So it's, people storming a U.S. military base in Afghanistan probably would have found some Taliban flags that guys are trying to bring home. We were not the Taliban. So there's the trophy aspect there. I don't know the scenario that these were found in, but Islamic State has been a clear issue there, with or without any staging issues. Mm-hmm. They've primarily been focused in the kind of central portion, kind of the desert area just south of the Euphrates. I don't know. There has been a lot of ISIS activity as of late, honestly. So if they were staging attacks, they were doing a bad job of it.
Let me ask you this. ISIS, I feel like we've been bombing them forever. I know there's very little you can do without a ground game. But how are these guys still operating? I feel like just earlier this year we dropped, 180 munitions in a revenge strike that was partially on ISIS, partially on the IRGC. How are these guys still rolling? I feel like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were not this resilient.
They're pretty beat down at this point. And I think we've seen evidence of that in recent weeks. It's been like 10 days since the Aleppo offensive kicked off. And I think the fact that ISIS hasn't kicked off anything significant, and in fact, it looks like SDF might even be taking the fight to them in a couple different areas. I think they're pretty beat down. It looks to me like we just don't want to mount somebody, be it SDF. Most of these encampments were in Assad-held territory, so it's looking at Assad like, why aren't you doing it? And honestly, if we look at how the last 2 weeks went, maybe that's why. Maybe they couldn't. They could contain to a degree, but they couldn't eradicate. So we might see a concerted effort. There might be some agreement reached between HTS and other organizations to go after Islamic State.
That is fair. So, speaking of Islamic State, a lot of them go to prison. How do you say this? Zendaya? Not Zendaya.
Zendaya.
How do you say it?
Sednaya. I'm sorry. Sednaya Prison.
Sednaya Prison. What's going on here?
I am working on a video right now to go into more depth, but this was a prison in Syria that was uncovered, and there's already comparisons being made to portions of the Holocaust. Now, I know that's a big thing to compare to. The reason they're saying that is we're starting to see compartments come out where the shoes were stacked up from the victims, and it's like falling out the doors. We're seeing countless torture devices uncovered, people that have been sacked away there for decades. There's already been 2 cases where they've recovered people alive that appear to have been down there for 40 years. So this is a political prison, if you will. There appears to be an above-ground portion called the White Prison, normal prison, if you will, albeit probably a little more brutal than most of us are used to because it's in Syria under Assad. Then underground, you had the Red Prison, and there were initially estimated to be hundreds, maybe even thousands of people below ground. There were videos coming out showing hundreds of video cameras monitoring all these different cells. Speculation that there were hidden doors and sealed compartments that the rescuers couldn't get into. I don't think that ended up being the case. The white hats or the white helmets came out and said they conducted a search with canines. They were sniffing through, trying to find signs of life. It looks like they've uncovered everything at this point. I think the reason there was so much hope or thought that there were more there is because this is where people would be disappeared. So we've heard about this in past regimes. Saddam, of course, did this. Stalin was famous for this, where people would they'd be taken away and never seen again. And the families had no idea. Were they just executed? Are they in a prison somewhere? That is Sednaya. So I saw a quote earlier. I'm going to mess it up, but there were around 4,000 prisoners documented at one point in the prison. 200 of them were listed as terrorists. So I think it's easy to look at this and say, yeah, well, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, like, of course they're going to be arresting dudes and throwing them in the deep, dark dungeons. Tiny fraction. Like, what is that, 0.5% of the prisoners had terrorism ties? They're pulling guys out that were political prisoners, just disagreed with Assad, and we're seeing a lot of that. And pretty nasty stuff at this point. Again, I'm working on a video to go into it, but I think it's one of those where we're going to get a lot more pretty terrifying information over the course of the next couple days.
Do you think it will put Assad up in the most evil of evil dictators when all is said and done and all comes out about this prison?
I hope so. Assuming all this stuff is true and there's no indications that it's being staged or faked. However, there's already been some fake images tied to it, which is so frustrating because the actual images and actual videos are awful enough. The minute you add a fake one in, you just discredit things. Like, what are we doing here? So there is a little bit of that, just as there is with any subject. I hope I would love to see Assad brought forward to account for his crimes, because in this case, it's not a foreign entity that got him, right? It's his own people that rose up and said enough is enough. So I think that would send a really good message. Also, I feel like if he's captured in Syria, he's probably going to get shot up and strung up pretty quickly. I don't know. It'd be nice to see him held accountable for this stuff, and I do think we're going to see a lot more. It's chaos right now, right? People are free for the first time in who knows how long. Free to, and there's going to be some pushback on, like, is it really freedom when it's under HTS? Well, they just went in and liberated this prison with political prisoners and pulled people out that have been held for 40 years. They couldn't do that for a long time, and they are. So I would imagine we're going to see more of that type of stuff. And, hopefully it all comes to the surface. I think we should know about this kind of thing.
Do you think that Syria will become destabilized, or I guess it already is destabilized, perpetually unstable like Libya? Or do you think that is just a knee-jerk reaction for people because that's how it went in Iraq and how it went in Libya? And I guess Tunisia was fine. So was Egypt. But
yeah, there's a good argument right now that it's about to become the Afghanistan of the region, if you will, because Afghanistan was technically Southeast Asia. And the reason I say that is Israel, just as soon as Assad fell, not only started hitting targets inside of Syria, destroying like anything that Syria had in terms of naval or air capabilities. I think they knocked out the entire Airforce of Syria in like 3 waves of strikes. The pictures coming out are wild. And if you're Israel, why not, right?
Right.
The same thing with the Navy. Well, HTS can't rebuild that stuff. They probably can't purchase it. Who knows what they're going to do to...
You don't think they have any shipbuilders?
We'll see. That's the thing with a lot of these guys defecting is they probably do have like, all jokes aside, those pilots are probably now in Syria and looking for a job. A lot of the regime fighters laid down their arms and didn't fight back. So they're there, similar to the Taliban didn't have helicopter pilots, but the Afghan army did, and they're flying helicopters. So how did that happen? The guys changed sides when they had to. So, and Israel is moving in to just past the Golan Heights in the southern portion of Syria, because again, there's no opposition. They're kind of encroaching into Syrian territory. They say for self-defense purposes. We'll wait and see how that plays out long term. But that's the problem. Again, we're talking about Islamic State in the south and eastern portion of the country. Maybe the U.S. gets a little more free and loose hitting those targets. You've got Turkey pushing in from the north under the SNA. We've already seen some pretty nasty images and videos of SNA atrocities being committed against Kurds in the region. And now Israel pushing in from the southeast. So, there's a lot of indications that it could go down the toilet. Even if HTS is better for the people and, allows women to go outside and there's some degree of freedom, it still could be absolute chaos across that country.
Do you think the Israeli ground incursion is defensible?
I don't know. I'm still trying to sort through that one because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Is it a permanent emplacement or is it temporary?
The official statements from Israel right now is that it's temporary. But
well, how long? Temporary to what?
Until they feel like the threat has subsided, I guess. But here's the thing: what do conditions have to look like on the ground for Israel to say, you know what, we're good, we're out of here? Because if it's HTS, they can just say, listen, this is a designated terrorist organization with ties to Al Qaeda. It's not stable. I don't know. I actually didn't expect Israel to do that. One of their arguments, which is valid, is that Hezbollah has largely been armed through Syria, from Iran, land route through Syria, and they've been targeting those crossing points for a while now. And in these airstrikes, they didn't just go after military capabilities and air defense sites, but they went after missile production facilities and storage locations of Iranian weapons that they had located, because air defense was down, right? So just pull out that old list of targets and just start slinging warheads wherever you can. So that all makes sense. That's all understandable because Israel's been on the receiving end of those munitions now for a long time. Mm-hmm. So why not take that opportunity? It's not entirely clear to me why they needed to have boots on the ground inside of Syrian territory right now.
They took the largest mountaintop in Syria.
Yeah, and old school, you could say, well, it's the high ground, and now they have, yeah, but that's, I got it, but they're also not at war with Syria.
I think they technically are.
No, is it an ongoing conflict, an ongoing state of war?
Isn't it they never negotiated a peace deal with Syria, something like that? They have one with Egypt and Jordan, but not with Syria? Is that a thing? That's why they have the Golan Heights still?
I'm not sure. I just... Yeah, I don't...
It seems bad. That's what I'll say. I think it seems... I understand why they're doing the strikes, whatever. I think taking territory, whether it's temporary or not, it's not the same action as Russia invading Ukraine, but the justification's the same, right? That they're doing it because there's a threat to them. I don't know. I don't buy it.
Yeah, I also, we can say they took the highest mountaintop in that area, and tactically that makes sense. Okay, but, so was creating a land bridge for Russia from mainland to Crimea. Tactically that made sense. It still wasn't their territory, and they just took it. So, I don't...
Right.
I'm having a hard time kind of parsing through why that's an okay thing right now, and why that level of deterrence could not have been done maybe from the air or from the Israeli side of the border. So, more to come.
It's a little bit vain, too. Do they think HTS is going to gun straight for Israel? Don't they have, ISIS and the 70 other factions in Syria to deal with?
Yeah, I wouldn't... There's been some videos coming out of HTS saying, Israel and Saudi Arabia are next. Again,
I didn't know. Wait,
but
retraction.
No, but
I didn't know that.
But
yeah.
it's not anybody official from HTS, right? It's just a random guy picked up a camera and held an HTS flag and said that. When you actually look at the HTS leadership, they haven't said that. It's kind of the nature of this type of thing. Do you write that off? If you're Israel, do you write that off entirely? Probably not, right? You got to take some level of got to give that some level of credence. But I mean, to me, it just seems like an opportunistic move by Israel at this point.
It's not good. No. So Air Force One?
I was going to say that's about where it sits. We're gonna, by the time this goes live, certainly there'll be something else, but don't get too caught. For anybody following this, the acronyms are important. So the only ones that I would really focus on right now are HTS, the group that just took Damascus, and then the SDF, this is the group aligned with the United States in the Northeast, SNA, the group aligned with Turkey, and then ISIS, Al-Qaeda, which everybody knows. After that, don't worry too much about acronyms because it's all going to change. But, yeah, chaotic times, man. And all of this happened while I was off the grid on a flight cross country.
Question for you. Before we get into Air Force One, do you want to talk about the annexation threat that our country is administering to our northern neighbors?
I'll let you lead this one. I just saw some headlines.
So we saw President-elect Trump met with Trudeau and said, well, if your economy can't be stable with tariffs, then we should annex you, and you'd make a great governor. Prime Minister's a better title than governor, but we'd make you a governor, which is kind of crazy. But then he said it again on 60 Minutes and said it again on Meet the Press. And now he tweeted, "It was a pleasure to have dinner with the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon."
That's not real. Did he actually put that out?
That is a honest to God tweet, a truth, as he calls them. So,
listen, Trump can troll.
Yeah, he can. To me, I agree it is a troll, but I'm also just like, you're the president. If Russia was making these threats to its neighbors, I'd be like, it's not funny. And I do think it's kind of funny to threaten Canada this way, but part of me thinks he might be serious, and that makes me very worried, where I'm like, what are we doing right now? We're the much more powerful nation to our neighbors. Should we really be acting this way, especially when Israel is invading Syria and Russia's in Ukraine?
All right, I've got the other side of that. I think it's a troll. I think it's a joke. I think he found like a meme that people were laughing at, so he's going to ride that. He's going to ride that meme till it dies. I don't think there's any real concern of like military action up north, and that actually does kind of lead into my experiences with government officials this last week, where everything was just straight scripted, man. Like it was awesome, but so boring. Because there was nothing like that where, like, I could have told you that answer before I asked the question. I don't know. I understand at times that can be a lot, and it is going to be exhausting. I forgot how exhausting it can be to wake up and find out that Trump said something absolutely off the rocker.
Right.
Because we haven't had that now for 4 years. But I'll tell you what, the other side of, like, totally scripted, predictable talking points is yeah. Coma-inducing, man.
I agree. Perhaps it is a joke. I imagine it is, but it's also just like, what are we doing here? But as you said, scripted. Give me the lowdown here. Air Force One, Lloyd Austin, Pat Ryder. Pat Ryder of the internet, as they call you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I met Jen, who's the Pentagon social media person in D.C. a few months ago. We'd stayed in touch about some possible projects, and that had not materialized. And she just sent me a note last week and said, "Do you want to fly on? Or you want to go on a trip with us too? You'll like this, Ben. California, then South Korea, then Japan." And this was a couple days before little attempted coup in South Korea.
Yeah.
Fun fact: that fell off the agenda. They actually didn't go to South Korea.
Did they go to Japan?
Yeah, after I left.
Yeah.
I didn't do that because a part of this is DOD, understandably so. They can't pay for anything. So I'm on the hook for travel to the link-up point and then all lodging and meals throughout. And, like, 3 nights in Tokyo and Seoul, as it was supposed to be, or 4 or something like that, was going to get like quickly close to $3,000, and I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And being away for a week. So, anyways, I flew out to D.C., jumped on the plane, which I guess is the same that the president takes. It's just not
Were you
Air Force
impressed?
One. Was I impressed?
Yeah.
The plane was pretty below average, if I'm being honest. Like,
Whoa.
the seats for me, I was just like normal press in the back. And don't get me wrong, awesome experience, start to finish, right? Totally unique. But this was not like flying high class. The seats were like exit row, in like you had a little more room, but they were also just normal seats. There's no in-flight entertainment, and there's no public Wi-Fi. So there's Wi-Fi for the staffers, like the DoD staffers, that made up the majority of the flight. So SecDef had like his own compartment. As you move towards the front of the plane, it's like completely sealed off, and you can walk around it, but like it's a separate compartment, probably soundproof walls and all that stuff. In the very back was the press. I was the second seat from the back. And there were probably like 8 people total in the press, and that includes the DoD folks. So they were all used to it. They'd done it before, first time here. But it was cool, unique in that sense. We went to DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, saw some cool stuff there. It was interesting, some of the drone talk that they were having. Felt a little behind what we're seeing in Ukraine, actually.
Oh.
So these are like startups working in the drone space, and they're presenting things that, like, it's good. And there's one, actually, I'm going to talk to them about trying to get some more information on this. One of the big arguments about how we would fight a war is we're watching Ukraine and Russia pick up drones off the shelf and strap warheads and fly them into tanks the next day. We're like, well, we couldn't do that. Our soldiers wouldn't be able to buy off Amazon or Alibaba or something. And we kind of can now. So they greenlit a new program where there's a list of commercially available drones that are authorized for use, and the military units can just be like, we'll take 50 of those and buy them, and they're cheap, like, compared to military technology. So there's some nuance to it, but like, it's an attempt to kind of get us to that direction that we were not there like 2 or 3 years ago at all. So there's some cool pieces for sure. Honestly, a lot of it was way over my head because it was space, AI, missile technology, just like very, very complex technology topics. And they're bringing in people like PhDs and, you know, have run AI startups
nerds.
and stuff. And yeah, they're all smarter than me. So, but yeah, so that was cool. And then we went out to the, flew again out to the Reagan Library, and they did the Reagan National Defense Forum there. And that's where I got to do a bunch of the different interviews. So, quick interview with General Ryder, Pentagon Press Secretary. And then
What a cool guy.
You know what? Yeah, got a good chance to talk with him off camera quite a bit, and just like the most personable of that group, I'll say.
Right?
Yeah, the most down to earth. So I tried it in the clips I made. I tried to make him a little more personable with him, because he can do that, and he can come across like a normal person, whereas some of the others were very stiff, very rigid. But it was cool talking to General Ryder. He was not the focus of attention, if that makes sense, because the SecDef was there. So he was regularly like holding back one level, and that one level is where I was. So we actually got to talk a lot.
Wow.
It was cool. We spent some time talking about Syria, because I had asked the secretary some questions about that, and he just went on a long rant about kind of what you would expect, where he's like, you know, it's messy. Like, our interest there is Islamic State, and like essentially like what you'd expect from a press briefing, but just more laid back and kind of like genuine, if that's the right way to put it.
Yes. That does seem right. Did you ask him to come on the pod?
I didn't ask anyone.
He's going to
there.
need a job
I didn't
here
ask
in
anyone there.
50
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing across the board. Almost everybody I interacted with is out of a job in a few weeks, except Defense Innovation. That is not a presidential appointment. That is not a political
Really?
climate. Yeah, I learned that. So, because what they're trying to do is to drive innovation for the long term, they said they don't want it, when they stood up the organization, they said we do not want this dependent on the current president and somebody who's out of a job in a couple of years. So DIU it's like a 7-year term or whatever it is, and they stay in between. I thought that was really cool.
That is very cool. So, do we know who the next Pentagon press secretary is?
I haven't seen anything. No.
I fear we're going to be run out of business if Pat Ryder and John Kirby start a podcast together.
So
I mean, these two yappers, but both of them very dry in humor. But.
Yeah, here's the thing. So I did get a chance, awesome, very unique, to talk with the Secretary of Defense. There were no other reporters there. It was just Preston with his phone on selfie mode, which I talked to them about. They were asking, like, do you want cameras? Do you want me to hold a camera? Do you want lighting? I said, no, I think the best way to do this with, like, senior officials is selfie mode, to make it look like you're right here. You're looking into Preston's phone. It's very personal. So that's what we did. But the Secretary of Defense gave the most scripted, canned answers I could have imagined. Borderline didn't answer the questions and just kind of talked about something else. Like, I actually want to bring up the questions I wanted to ask that I didn't, because I would have been more interested in those. But I asked him about Syria, and he gave me... So I had to run the questions by all of his team beforehand. They never said no. They never said yes, but. They just kept asking, like, what are you going to ask? What are you going to ask? What are you going to ask? Maybe it's possible I could have asked something and they would have said, no, you can't do that, but it didn't happen for the ones that I brought up. And when I brought up the Syria one, they said he's probably going to say A, B, C, D. Dude, word for word. Like, it was exactly. General Ryder said, you can ask him, but he's probably going to give this answer. That is the exact answer he gave. Like, he went straight to a script almost, is the way I'd put it. And the other, I asked him about, like, innovation in the war, like what's going to be the big change out of Ukraine, and he spent the majority of the time talking about how much Ukraine's partners have meant to the war effort. And it just felt very, like, cool, but, like, really, is that the thing? In 40 years, we're going to look back and say the big thing that came out of the war in Ukraine was NATO helping Ukraine? Or is it maybe going to be, like, something to do with drones or satellites or...
I saw that response and I was like, what are you talking about, dude?
Yeah.
I know maybe it shouldn't be my immediate reaction, but I was just like, what do you mean it's the allies coming together?
So, like, scripted, I don't know, it's not all that exciting. And that's the challenge with this line of work, if you will, right? Like, would it be cool to get the Secretary of Defense on a podcast or on a video? Like, yes, 100%. But they're not going to say anything that's, like, new or unique. It's the same thing. You've heard it all before. So, actually, the questions that I wanted to ask that I didn't, just because didn't have time, and actually decided that they probably wouldn't have been worth my time. Because, again, with any of these folks, I know you've done some interviews like this as well, you're trying to ask a question that your audience is interested in, that maybe hasn't been asked before, and that you're not going to get a canned answer that you can just read off a press release. It's really hard to find that. The higher up you go with these folks, the harder it is to find something that's not going to get a canned response. So, two that I wanted to ask that I decided against just because I thought I'm not going to get any sort of interesting answer or answer at all. One was about outsiders coming into DOD, because General Austin entered West Point in 1971 or 72 or something. And since then, he's been in the DOD. So I was going to ask about, hey, it looks like there might be some outsiders being considered for this position. What are some benefits that could serve the department? And what are some challenges you see them running into? Like, who better to ask that question of than the guy currently sitting in the role? But in talking with his team, they were like, yeah, he's probably going to, like, walk around that and not really answer it. And I thought, if I only have, like, 2 or 3 questions, do I really want one of them to be something that he dances around and doesn't answer? Like, so I skipped that one. And then the other one was about the politicalization of the force. I have a personal concern that we have like 4-star generals or any senior leaders really that exit the military as an apolitical entity, and then the day after, very shortly after, they're engaged in partisan politics. And like, if the military is apolitical, and then you simply take off the uniform and you become political, it's not a stretch to say, wait a minute, was that person making political decisions, or were they influenced by politics while they were in uniform?
That's a good point.
But the minute they take off the uniform, they're a private citizen, and we, of course, don't want to restrict anyone's rights in how they associate or what they say. But it's a concern I have, because I think at times that can reflect back on the service, like, understandably so. So I was just going to say, like, is the Pentagon thinking about that, or like, is that a topic of discussion, or how do you guys, like, what should we be doing there? Is there a better way to do this? The same thing, like, I felt like I was just going to get kind of a non-answer, all things considered, so I just didn't. And also, I only had a limited period of time, so just kind of went with the top 3. But
I will say I have appreciated the time I spent with Admiral Kirby, and I appreciated the time we spent at the Pentagon with Pat Ryder. Is it General Ryder, or is it just Pat Ryder?
I'll call him General Ryder. He's a major general. You can probably get away with Pat. Yeah.
Yeah, my bad. So I appreciate the time there, but it was also like on these, when they invite you, right? You're also there with a bunch of other influencers, and for some reason, it's always like we have these questions we want to know the answers to, and then we're always accompanied, no shade to anyone, with people who are like, what's NATO? Okay? And they give these big, exorbitant, grand answers, and then we're just like, so what do you think about Poland considering a no-fly zone over the western half of Ukraine? And we get the most canned answer in the world. I just feel like going forward, if they want to appeal to more, if they want to have a broader outreach, they're going to have to drop the canned answers, or at least answer them differently. Because, I mean, you and I both watched the press conferences. Like, we both knew the answers we were going to get ahead of time, So it's like, how do you think going forward they can bring life to it outside of just, all right, we invited a lifestyle creator who wants to know what the 5 branches of the military are. Yeah, 6 branches. Yeah.
But it's not across the board either, right? Because Kirby was pretty canned. But in the brief interactions we had with Secretary Blinken, he seemed more off the cuff. I don't know why that is.
Oh, I didn't meet Blinken. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a position thing. Like, I'd be hard pressed to attribute it to, like, I haven't met other secretaries of defense, right? I don't have a good comparison here.
Right.
I haven't met.
I met Donald Rumsfeld at a Walmart once. I think I sold him a cooler when I worked at Walmart. I've never verified this, but he looked like him. Anyways, go on.
Yeah.
Well, he's dead now.
Rumsfeld,
very dead. Like 3 years ago, I think.
All right. Not keeping up with current events here. So, I don't know. I don't have a good comparison to say, like, well, it was better under a Republican, or it was better when it was somebody younger or different, or I don't know. My gut says that if Hegseth is nominated or it gets approved, I feel like he would be an interesting interview. He seems much more off the cuff, which, look, in what we're doing and what we're trying to get out of these folks, like, that's what you want, right? You want to be able to ask a question they maybe haven't heard before and get a unique answer. That, like, I want so badly to have that clip that's not, like, controversial or anything, but, like, that answers the question they haven't been asked before. And, like, where is it aired? It's on TikTok and YouTube. How crazy is that? So I don't know, younger maybe. Like General Ryder has so much experience being on camera, and he's very measured because, first off, that's his job as the press secretary. Like, his job isn't to, like, add color to these things. It's to, like, be the face of, like, the policy, right? And just, like, push it forward exactly from the SecDef. But I don't know. I'd like some more. Like, I showed Secretary Austin a picture of our friends in Ukraine holding a beat Navy flag, and he gave me a bit of a talk about how, like, the Army-Navy game is such a great tradition. I was like, just, like, how about a beat Navy or a, something?
Yeah.
Anything. I I think that would resonate more. Here's the thing. It's not just about making the
agree.
content. I think that would resonate more with people, and they'd feel more of a connection with the people that are in government instead of this, like, very canned, dry, like, who wants that in any position ever? Like, you don't want that from the people you watch on TV. You don't want that from the people you interact with in your daily life. Like, why would we want that from government officials? I want a little more life, a little more, like, a little more color in these things.
I do agree with you. I think their counter argument when we tell them this is we're the military, we don't need to impress anyone, right? But I guess my counter argument to them, to their counter argument would be you do actually, because all young people of America are ingesting Russian and Chinese propaganda 24/7. They don't even know it. So they do need to step it up. They do need to be likable. You know, was one thing I noticed is kind of a sidebar. The posture on these guys is crazy.
As in, it's good?
Yeah, like Pat Ryder stands straight up, like he's got an iron pole in him. All of them do, and I'm just like, what is going on here? Is this like a military thing?
Maybe. I mean, there's some of that with the military, I guess, but I know plenty of people in the military with bad posture, so I couldn't tie it exclusively to
So
that.
it's just like a leadership that you just get like an iron bar in your spine and you just stand.
It's an implant at 25 years, maybe. Yeah.
It's crazy. But am I wrong, though? I mean, I'll let the viewers know if I'm wrong here, but it definitely seems like they've got something going on.
Petraeus did not. He was kind of hunched a little bit, was he?
Oh, I don't know. Petraeus had the affair and got kicked out when I was a sophomore in high school. So that's before my time. Not to age you or anything. Way before my time. Did you ever meet Petraeus?
I don't think so. I think he came to our base, but I wasn't. But when they do that, they're not like meeting with everybody. They're meeting with like the guys they should meet with. The guys getting like Purple Hearts and Valor Awards. So I don't think I was even in the. I think I was off doing something else, but I wouldn't have been in that group.
When
I was on site.
Someone like the general, or was he Secretary of Defense? What was he?
Petraeus?
He was, yeah.
CIA, and he was CENTCOM commander, and then I think he went to CIA. I don't think he was.
He was never Secretary of Defense? Maybe not. So when someone like that comes to the base, are all the guys like, yeah, whatever, we don't even care? Or are people excited, or is it just like, whatever?
Depends. So we did that a couple days ago, right? SecDef flies into Moffett Air Base, where DIU is, and like it kind of shuts down. The entire building shut down. People were not able to work because like the security details moving through and kind of sweeping it beforehand, and traffic is shut down. So that's I imagine that gets tiring and exhausting, especially if you're not like able to see the person at all. I always thought it was kind of cool to say that these people came to our base or location or something, but by and large it's a little bit of an inconvenience unless you're like actually getting the picture or getting something from them. Again, because most of the time the speech that's given is pretty like, you know.
This is maybe what we need to do is part of West Point needs to be like watching the speech from Miracle, and having to create their own, because that seems to be the one consistent, is that no one can give a good speech or give a good answer anymore.
Well, when you get down the chain, you can. There's plenty of lower level brigade commander, brigade level and below leaders that can give some awesome speeches, but it's internally focused. It's when you get external, right. Everybody gets very nervous and buttoned up, which is.
Do you think? So let me ask you this. I've thought about this for a while. I know the U.S. military knows the clout it has, right? And it's very careful to suggest. It's very careful to issue threats, right? Do you think, though, if Lloyd Austin or the next guy, whether it's Ron DeSantis or Pete Hegseth, do you think it would hurt if the Secretary of Defense was just like, yeah, if Russia attacks Poland, we're going to beat their ass? Just in plain language like that. Do you think that escalates things? Or do you think, like, that's speaking straight down to earth?
I think
in a way everyone can easily understand.
So my Uber ride to the airport, as Uber rides do, we talked politics the whole way, which is...
Oh, it's always awful when they do that. I don't mind talking to my Uber driver, but I hate when they ask me what I do, and then I have to listen to about the vaccines and everything, and I'm just like,
or Russian biolab or U.S. biolabs in Ukraine.
Right.
I got that one on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, the guy very quickly turned war and conflict into a political conversation, and he said that he voted for Trump, was excited for Trump to come into office, and one of the things that he said was that he feels like the word of the United States is weak now, and it would have been weak under Harris, but people listen when Trump talks because they take him seriously, and they're intimidated at times about what he says. So the reason I bring all that up is I think it's exactly what you're saying. That is, I think one of the arguments for Trump is the threats of, if you do that, we're going to beat your ass, or if you do that, we're going to respond, instead of the it's like a running meme, right? Like, we condemn this action. It is not in line with international values. So I think the stronger talk or threatening talk, I think that was a feature, if you will.
Do you think it plays the same? So, like, I feel like we're going to kick their asses very much internally focused, language-wise, whereas the other language very externally. I guess that's kind of the difference between Trump and Biden, is that Biden's foreign affairs are very external focused, where Trump's are very internal focused, in the sense that... Does that make sense, what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I think it depends on the area. I know when you look at the Houthis, for instance, and Iran, a lot of their media was kind of laughing at us over the lack of response. Like, they would look at, hey, they just launched what would have been like 127 drone attacks against U.S. forces in Syria, and we conducted one wave of airstrikes. And they look at that and they're like, you're weak. We won. We'll do that again. Like, who cares?
Right.
It's a matter of showing strength or not. So we can talk all we want. That was perceived by that group as being weak. And by and large, especially down in Yemen, those attacks have continued. So in other areas of the globe, it might be received differently. Who knows, right? Maybe Russia hears that and freaks out and does something we don't want them to do. But I think it's received differently in different places. Now, we don't have the exact alternative, so we don't know exactly what a more overt military response would have done to those Iranian proxies. We don't know what a massive air campaign against the Houthis would have done. So we're kind of comparing it against the unknowns. But, sometimes that language, I think it lands well in Europe. I don't know that it lands all that well in the Middle East, per se.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here, and this might be a history lesson here. I believe U.S. officials used to talk this way. I believe Reagan talked this way to a certain extent. I remember, was it John Ashcroft? Someone was sent to Pakistan after 9/11 to tell them that if they did not assist in the hunt for bin Laden, that they would pull him out from the rubble of their regime. Something crazy like that, right? Do you think that it was perhaps Obama's red line? Remember, he puts down the red line and then nothing happens of it? Do you think that perhaps has led to more hesitancy in talking about things?
I do think there's been more hesitancy, and it's frustrating. It came up again a couple weeks ago when Russia launched their Orshnik missile, and so much media in the United States turned to like, oh my God, we better watch out. Russia's being serious. It's like, what happened to where, like, why are we not the ones that other countries are nervous about? Don't cross that line or the United States will do something. Like, I don't know when that happened and when that changed, but it does feel like that dynamic has shifted to where we are the largest superpower on Earth. We have the largest, most advanced military force, and it feels like in a lot of ways we're kind of nervous about what others might do, and it feels like we've lost a little bit of that. And I when I say lost a little bit of that, I don't mean like over the last 4 years or over the last 8 years. I don't know when the time is, but to your point, it does seem like in the past we were more ready to like kind of say the things to make other countries nervous. Hey, don't do that, or the United States might come in here and actually do something. I don't know. I think there's a place for that.
Do you think the Russia should be worried about what happens if we escalate? Like, that should be a talking point of ours?
Yes. Yes.
That is, I agree. I think that is the way to talk at them going forward. I don't know if it resolves anything, but
Like it seems like, and now they're the ones making all the crazy nuclear threats left and right, and like are kind of suggesting they're ready to go down with a burning ship, like and just set the whole world ablaze. But I see very, very little in Russian media about any concern of what the U.S. is going to do. Like, they get a little frustrated when we send more weapons. They get a little angry when Ukraine strikes inside of their territory. And it's part of its posturing and messaging and all that. I got it. But, like, it just doesn't seem like they're all that concerned. Now, maybe the argument is they're not striking, train cars in Poland that are delivering munitions because they're scared of what could happen. But so far as actions in Ukraine, Syria, Africa, and honestly, kind of their sabotage ops across Europe and elsewhere around the world, it just doesn't seem like they're concerned.
that is true. Do you think it is that they're not concerned? I guess you're right. I guess it is that they're not concerned. But I guess part of the issue is that this administration's been very transparent in what their red lines are, Like, we know what results in U.S. forces being in Ukraine. It's use of biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons. And we know what the U.S. response is, right? They've communicated that it is the total destruction of the Russian military. So, do you think that perhaps not communicating that would be more effective than communicating that? Because they did prevent a nuclear weapon use, if the accounts are to be believed, through those threats.
Well, but that's kind of the argument going back to 1949 or something, right? Like, technically everything we've done and everyone has done has prevented nuclear war. So I think it's always hard to point to something to say that prevented this thing to happen now. You mentioned the nuclear, chemical, biological thing with Ukraine. I hadn't heard that. So you're saying that was at some point a red line about the U.S. would send troops to Ukraine if Russia violated that?
Bill Burns, the CIA director, was sent to Moscow in fall of 2022 to communicate that if nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons were used, that the United States would intervene and it would destroy the entire Russian military. And then Lloyd Austin called Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, and said, "This is what's going to happen if you don't do that." And he said, Shoigu said, "I don't take lightly the threats."
I do remember.
And Lloyd Austin said, "I'm the leader of the most powerful military in the history of humanity. I don't make threats." So,
see, why couldn't he say anything like that in my interview?
So maybe you should have threatened nuclear weapons on him or something. Maybe you would have gotten it.
Sock that away for next time.
Because that is I felt like such a moving line, yet it's buried in the pages of a Bob Woodward book,
Oh, that's right. That's where I remember hearing that. Okay. I was thinking, I definitely heard that, but I feel like it was more recent than, you're right, it was in that book.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. It's always a tough line, right? We drew a line with the Taliban in Afghanistan, kind of, and said, hey, we're going to leave on this date, and that did not go well. That was probably not the right move to signal when we were going to leave the country. Conversely, in that case, you don't want to stay in the country indefinitely just because
right.
Putting out a date is a problem. So I think there's always issues with red lines. And Russia is smart. They find ways around those red lines, right? What if they annex some territories? So what if they use a nuclear warhead in their annexed territories now? And they say, this is, according to us, this is our own territory. So are you going to come after us for setting off a nuke in our own territory? And that's been one of the big questions, is what if they detonate a test in occupied Kherson or in occupied Zaporozhye or Donetsk, Luhansk?
That's not. You think that's a way around the red lines?
It's in Russia, according to Russia. That's what I'm saying. Is
but not according to us. We don't recognize it. So it's to us, it's just you just nuked Ukraine. I understand your point, but the United States doesn't care what Russia thinks is Russia.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's one of the challenges with all this, right?
Right. Do you think if they made you defense secretary, defense press secretary, Pentagon press secretary, you would do a good job, or do you think you would cause a larger war?
Those are the options.
Yeah,
it's a good job. A good job,
Yeah.
or you spark a larger war. Is there anything in the middle I can lean on? I I don't know. I don't want that job. It looks so stressful to face down confrontational reporters all day, every day, trying to get you to slip up, and having to sift through a ton of classified information and figure out what you can release publicly. That sounds awful. I don't have to do that. I just look at unclass stuff that's on the internet, so I don't have to like worry about what I can or can't say. Now, the press secretary is really U.S. focused, so I think it'd be hard pressed for Ryder to spark something broader overseas. But yeah, I would not want that job at all. I'd be interested to do more stuff with the Pentagon and try to document what they're doing from a different perspective, maybe. But I have no issue answering questions and talking to people about stuff. That format is, they're trying to trip him up. And they're trying to get him to say things that he shouldn't say. Or they're pressing him on things that he can't talk about. I would hate that.
You think so? I assume you didn't meet Jeff Schogel while you were there.
I don't think he was there. No, I was looking for him.
I am so fascinated by this man.
The task and purpose reporter, right?
Yeah, for the listeners who don't know, Jeff Schogel is a reporter, very good reporter. But when the Pentagon press conference is very boring, he tends to ask a wide variety of questions, whether it's about U.S. soldiers being bitten by hookers in Poland, or whether or not haircuts are mission necessary. What was his most recent one? Oh, whether or not the United States would send their own poop balloons into North Korea in response to theirs. It always catches Pat Ryder and his deputy off guard, and it's always hysterical. But he wasn't there when I was at the Pentagon, and if he wasn't there at yours, is he just like a ghost fleeting in the wind?
I think they said he dialed in at one point, so maybe he's not based there in D.C. I don't know.
Oh, man,
now,
I don't know.
On this trip, there were like 3 other journalists, so it was a small trip at baseline. There were a fair amount at the Defense Forum, but I didn't really see anyone I recognized there.
Right. Speaking of recognizing people, the South Korean president not allowed to leave the country anymore. They tried to impeach him on Saturday. It failed because his party boycotted the vote, and now they're going to try it again on Wednesday. So we will see if it's successful or not. The protests are growing larger. They now have a makeshift statue of him, and they've put it in a makeshift jail. And they're hitting it over their head with K-pop light sticks.
Is that real? The light stick?
This is real.
Right.
This is real. If you go online, you can see these protests. I mean, it looks like a concert, all right? They have K-pop light sticks. They're blasting Bruno Mars, various impeachment carols.
Impeachment carols.
Then I think they're blasting K-pop, but it could be anything. I just don't understand. I just don't recognize it. So that's what they're doing. They seem like they're having the time of their life. But the question is, President Yoon, do you think he's out? Do you think the second impeachment attempt works? Because his party says we will not impeach him. We want him to quit. But he says, I'm not quitting. I'm not going anywhere. So do you think they impeach him this time?
I feel like
Wednesday.
Again, not something I've spent. I'm learning all this from you. You're my source on all this. So my gut says that this was so poorly received, and so many countries around the world immediately were like, hey, that's not okay. You can't do that. I feel like there's got to be some international pressure building on his party to say, like, you got to get rid of this dude. I mean, again, I don't know the details of it, but this trip with the SecDef was supposed to go to Korea, and I didn't get the itinerary for the second part because I wasn't going on the second part, but I think they wrote that off. It's like, that's a big deal for the U.S. Secretary of Defense to say, like, just kidding, we're not coming anymore. I feel like the pressure will mount and they'll do away with this guy.
I hope. We will see. South Korean presidents typically don't have good faiths. A lot of them get impeached or end up in jail. I think Moon is the only one who has not ended up in jail. Moon was the president before Yoon. But you might remember Yoon. Listeners might remember Yoon. He came to the United States for a state visit, and he sang American Pie to the reception. Because when he was a student in America, it was his favorite song. And apparently karaoke is very big in Korea. So
can I just say that
yeah,
it's got to be so shitty that, because I've seen that all over the news recently, Like, that's the thing he's going to be remembered for, is
As
singing
coup guy, or
that's it. As a failed coup and singing American Pie, the United States. Like, I feel
it's
like
gonna
the
go
dude's
crazy in the Netflix documentary.
he's probably got like a pretty storied past to make it to the point of being president. But it does seem like the two dominant themes are, this is the dude that sang American Pie at the White House, and he failed his coup. So be careful how you go out, I guess.
For the first time, Secretary Blinken says explicitly the United States will recognize a Syrian government if it adheres to 4 principles. You ready?
Let's hear it.
Respect the rights of minorities, facilitate the flow of humanitarian aid, prevent Syria from being used... Wait, hold on. The preview thing's done on my watch. Let me pull it up on Twitter really quick. Sorry, everyone. It says it will recognize the Syrian government if they respect the rights of minorities, facilitate the flow of humanitarian assistance, prevent Syria from being used as a base for terrorism or posing a threat to its neighbors, and ensuring chemical or biological weapons are secured and safely destroyed. That's pretty...
I think they're laying the groundwork to recognize HTS, because all of that stuff seems pretty attainable. If they remove the terrorist designation, I think they don't have any incentive to house Islamic State. They haven't in the past. They don't have any incentive to go back to their ties with Al-Qaeda, because this was kind of the desired end state, is for more recognition. If that's one of the terms, if I'm HTS, I'm like, yeah, got it. The oppression piece, so far, so good. I mean, they just put out a statement the other day saying minorities will be protected. They say women are free to wear what they wish, that anyone harming journalists will be arrested, and that private property and public buildings have to be protected. They're talking the talk, and so far they've walked the walk in that regard. Christians are celebrating in portions of Syria. Their Christmas trees going up. Base of terrorism operations. Why would they not allow humanitarian aid to come in? Jolani sent in humanitarian efforts to Aleppo the minute the city fell. They were feeding the people of Aleppo, providing power to people who hadn't hardly had power for a long time, medical services, cleaning the streets. Like, he's doing that already. Not posing a threat to the region and neighbors in the region, I feel like is open to interpretation.
Yeah, it is open to interpretation. I did see a member of the Syrian Free Army, which, as we said, is like 500 people now, but they said that their only enemies going forward are Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. And that is not HTS's standpoint, but does posing a threat to Iran count as posing a threat to your neighbors?
I wouldn't listen to that guy, whoever said that. So Hezbollah has already come out and said, we welcome an open relationship with HTS.
Open relationship.
Or whatever. They said something like congratulating HTS. Like, Hezbollah switched. Like that. They're now on like the, great, let's see what we can do to work with these guys.
When we talk Hezbollah, is it just like one guy who's like the press secretary in Turkey, or are there still people left?
There's still some people left. Pretty decimated, but they still have a media arm. And it seems like, from what I'm seeing, Hezbollah is saying, let's be on good terms. Which, if it sounds like a 180 from where they were 3 days ago, that's correct. All right? So, yeah. HTS has fought Hezbollah before, and now they're saying, let's get along. And Jelani sent a letter to Iran talking about getting along and adhering to Islamic principles and not fighting each other. So, yet to see look, Iran still might view this as an opportunity to maintain some degree of control in the region. They might try to find a way to provide Jelani with all of the equipment that the Syrian army just lost. They might try to provide drones and food, honestly, to a degree to the Syrian people. Don't write Iran off quite yet, but the alliances are quickly shifting. Yeah.
Interesting. So do you think they will be... I guess, I mean, who knows what the future holds for these guys?
Exactly.
I'm kind of fascinated by it. That is for sure.
Again, so to go back to the Hezbollah thing, when this kicked off in Aleppo, one of the arguments was they're doing this because Hezbollah has had to withdraw a lot of their forces to fight Israel, and they don't have the ability to send in reinforcements. And any other time, the question would have been, when are the Hezbollah troops going to arrive to crush this HTS rebellion? because those two
Right.
groups have fought in the past. So for them to go in 2 weeks from this might be the group that could destroy HTS and save Assad to we now want to be on your side tells you everything you need to know about this conflict. Like, it is changing by the day. The alliances are changing. Those two groups should not be on the same team. They might be to a degree now. They're Sunni and Shia. They're in different countries. They've killed each other in the past. If they find common ground, then, like, what are we doing?
Do you think? How do we say it? Jolani? Yeah.
Jolani.
Do you think Jolani could serve as inspirations for Ahmad Massoud?
In Afghanistan?
Yeah.
I don't think the inspiration is the problem with the opposition
Right, I mean,
in Afghanistan.
The young line of Panjshir? Yeah.
I mean, it's great. I like they're doing a good job, the National Resistance Front there in northern Afghanistan, but they are outgunned, outnumbered, out-resourced.
Are they fighting?
Yeah. Still carrying out operations occasionally, probably every other week or so. They'll kill a couple of Taliban fighters, but
Do they hold territory?
kind of. They've got a little bit in the Panjshir Valley, kind of where Massoud famously was from, but mostly it's because the Taliban haven't pushed in there. It's nothing serious. Honestly, the thorn in the Taliban side is not the National Resistance Front; it's Islamic State. So,
Right.
NRF, great, love what they're doing. Wish them all the best. They don't have any foreign backing that I can tell, and they're, long shot from. I mean, they've destabilized the Taliban a little bit to show like they're the insurgents to the Taliban, which is funny after seeing the Taliban have to deal with that for so long. But they've got a long ways to go before.
They don't like it so much now, do they? Yeah.
It kind of sucks, doesn't it? It's kind of hard to do that. That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's not too great now, huh? Interesting. Do you think Russia will try to annex their old naval bases, or do you think they give them up? Because they kind of... I mean, I understand Ukraine is not Syria, but they did this exact thing when Ukraine changed their leader. They went in, they annexed their naval base. Do you think they do the same in Syria?
Yeah, so the challenge that Russia has in Syria is it's a long ways away. And I don't mean that as condescending to anybody, but if you look at a map here, the naval base, to get their troops out of there, they can't go through the Black Sea anymore. Remember?
No.
Russian naval ships, military ships cannot enter the Black Sea. So they have to go all the way around to the Baltics. Same vice versa. So if they want to move anybody to that naval base, it's coming a long ways to get there. Russia's capable of doing that, but it's a long way around. The air base can only get, really it's a hub for Africa and the Middle East. It's kind of the Russian hub. So moving to that air base, without that air base, they would be forced to find some alternate routes into Africa, maybe Libya, possibly Sudan. Not a lot of great options. So they very much want those two entities. Reinforcing them at this point is a real issue. I don't know how many troops they have on the ground, but they are outnumbered and surrounded. And remember, the groups that surround them now have medium-range surface-to-air missile systems. So I don't know how much Russia wants to be flying reinforcements in over contested territory with a military that now has a decent air defense capability. So I wouldn't expect them to do that. However, it's still in the cards. They might negotiate something to, again, kind of fall on the side of HTS, like Hezbollah is doing right now. They'll provide ammunition, they'll provide training, they'll provide advisors, they'll provide humanitarian assistance in exchange for keeping these bases.
How do you think... So we know that the Syrian National Army, which is Turkey's puppet, right? Or Turkey's proxy, is attacking the Kurds now, the Syrian Democratic Forces. How do you see a reality where I assume the U.S. will reinforce its proxy, not with soldiers necessarily, but with more arms and stuff? Do you see that becoming a thing where Turkey could potentially leverage opening up the Bosphorus Strait, in exchange for the U.S. giving up support of the Kurds?
You know what? Not sure. That's getting a little over my head, to be honest. Something I hadn't really thought about. So I don't want to throw unfounded opinions out there. That's a good question.
I thought of it on the spot. I mean,
Look at you.
it definitely feels like something that could, I mean, if I'm Turkey, maybe I leverage it, right?
The Russians are freaking out a little bit about the Turkish role in all of this, for what it's worth. They seem to be very angry at Turkey more than anyone else, like more even than Assad and his regime, which is interesting.
Yeah, Assad doesn't seem mad at all.
Nobody, yeah.
No, he was saying. Yeah.
Well, what I mean is the Russian channels that I'm watching are not upset with Assad. They're upset with Turkey. And it's interesting because, like, it's debatable whether or not Turkey knew something like this was going to happen. There's no hard evidence of Turkish support for HTS. The closest you could come is they haven't killed them as much as they maybe could have. So it's kind of a stretch. But realistically, they are pushing back against HTS through the SNA. So it feels like in Russia they're blaming this on Turkey, which maybe will lead to something else. But it's interesting to see that.
Interesting. You remember when Turkey shot down the Russian fighter jet that flew over their territory?
A wild card, man. Turkey's the wild card.
A wild card. I don't think there have been several times where Russian fighter jets have crossed over in the NATO territory since the beginning of this war. No one. They don't fly over Turkey, though, that's for sure. They do not fly over Turkey. So.
Pure chaos.
Well, my friend, I think that might wrap it, unless you have anything else. Oh, I do have a question for you before we go.
Sir. Let's hear it.
So, Bakhmut, remember this battle? Lasted longer than Stalingrad. When they're fighting over a shed for months at a time, and they're fighting over rooms in a house, how does that look? Are they just, like, kind of peeking around the corner to see if someone's there and take a few pot shots? Or is something else happening? I guess I'm generally confused how it takes months, fighting over rooms in a house or fighting over a shed, because I can't imagine it's like intense firefight the entire time. Or is it?
No, it wouldn't be intense firefights the whole time. So think about a single building, let's say, on a street corner, and you're trying to advance in a couple different directions, and that building has multiple, in this case, Ukrainian soldiers hold up, not just inside of that building, but also around in other buildings protecting the approaches. So it's dangerous to get near it, so you might start using FPV drones and artillery and airstrikes to reduce that building over time, which is what we saw in Bakhmut. But what we saw with the Russians is they just would push troops forward to clear it in person. And you send a squad up, and it's not clear, and they all die or they're wounded. So you hit it again with some other munitions, and then maybe you do take a portion of that building, but then you've got the Ukrainians still on three sides firing into it. It just takes a long, long time. They might have 2 or 3 squads set to conduct that assault on that building today. Maybe none of them get in. And then the next day, it's 2 or 3 more assaults. So and then once you do get into the building, your defenses, remember the defenses are facing this way, so you're the Ukrainian soldier defending. So once the Russians get in, they're not defended well from this direction, right? They face another line of Ukrainian resistance. So what would happen a lot is they would take that building, and then the Ukrainians would be able to either force them out and reoccupy the building, or at least make it to where they couldn't take up positions inside of it. So
I see.
it was Stalingrad, right? You move into a building, you might not be able to hold it.
Right. Okay, so it's not like they're sitting in rooms next to each other, unable to...
Not for long. There would be cases where they're moving room to room, clearing it with maybe grenades or just going in with small arms fire. But rarely will a building be contested for very long. Like, it might end up being a full-day firefight, but it wouldn't be days on end where a single building, other than the Vovchansk aggregate plant up in Kharkiv. It was a huge facility, right? That one would have seen troops inside on both sides for days, but when you're talking about even an apartment building, by the time that clearance starts, it's not going to be like continual fighting inside for days on end.
Nice. Well,
Nasty.
I think that wraps us. Yeah, that's nasty fighting. So you're telling me you don't like jump and slide in, and no, that doesn't work.
Slide down the stairs. A lot of front rolls. Yep.
Right. So, all right. Well, that wraps us. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and if you listen on Spotify or Apple, make sure you click follow. And we appreciate you listening. And we'll be back on Friday. only, I mean, who knows what awaits us? Every day is another horror, isn't it? So, we will see. But any last words, Preston?
No, sir. Appreciate the conversation as always, Ben. Appreciate everybody's support. We'll see y'all here soon.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.